Have you ever been bored with your current gaming and just want to play a bunch of random crap? And then it turns out one of these in the stack is actually a teaser for something really good and worth keeping on your wishlist to look for the future full release? With the October edition of the Steam Next Fest earlier this month, that's just what I and several others were able to do. If you're not familiar with the Steam Next Fest, it's essentially an event contained on a single webpage, with developer live streams of featured games, an endless carousel of recommendations with an easy install demo button, and a leaderboard of the most wishlisted demos. The whole event is a cool effort from Valve to let its users discover random indie games. Personally, I spent this Next Fest just browsing this YouTube recommendations style spot on the page and found a selection of 12 random games to try, and I'll give my thoughts on each one, and whether they were worthy of being added to the Steam wishlist or not. As an aside, if you want to try any of these demos or look for any others, links to them and the October Next Fest Steam page, which happens to still be up at the time of recording, will be in the description. So the first game that I tried was Art of Destruction, which is not really a game, but more of a software toy, like the interactive Buddy Flash game from back in the day. The premise here is that you can view some pre-made areas like a town, and then you can freely pick from a selection of tools to destroy everything, sort of like in a Sims game or 4X game view. However, in this demo version, a lot was missing. Half of the tools in the menu you couldn't select, and overall I didn't try this out too much since it bugged out on me a lot and there wasn't that much to do. You place a tornado and it sucks things up, you burn a few things up, and then that's it. The area just sits there destroyed, it doesn't reset itself or anything. There's no meta progression or anything either, like say collecting a currency or score, or destroying trees in a specific way to unlock something. Not to say that this game absolutely requires something like that, though. I wanted to give these games listed a bit more time for description, but I really have nothing else for this one. What I can say is this one did not get on the Steam wishlist. Maybe as a freebie it would be cool. Thankfully, the next demo that I tried was way more interesting. That demo was for Peglin, a pachinko/Peggle roguelite type game. You play as a little goblin, shooting your ball downward onto bouncy pegs to deal damage to enemies in a turn-based battle on the top of the screen, trying to win each encounter and make it to the end of the Slay the Spire map, with the same kinds of forks in the road even, although in this one, you shoot the ball to pick which direction you go. The game is easy to grasp, and I started enjoying it minutes into playing. Despite it being based on a seemingly random bouncy ball element, there are some cool ideas used to make the game more tactical. You have a cycling stack of different ammo types, almost like a deck of cards, with different effects to take into account. The pegs you hit themselves have varying types and effects as well. Once you've decided where to shoot a ball, and the result plays out, the pegs you hit determine the damage you do in the next turn, and then you draw a new card, or a ball in this case. The structure makes the core game loop a fun mix of turn-based thinking and decisions on where to bounce the ball. The Slay the Spire inspiration doesn't just stop at the map, too. The battle rewards work the same, the map encounters are all the same, including text-based question mark encounters, campfires to upgrade your balls, and regular and boss enemy spaces. Now, speaking of the boss, I wasn't able to make it to the boss in the demo, which I assume is the end of the demo, so there is a bit of difficulty in this game. Ball shots sometimes don't work out the way you want. This could be an issue in later levels where you want more consistency, but I would need to see it in action. Either way, I may boot up the demo again to try and beat the boss because I did enjoy this one. Now, interestingly, this game has competition in the form of Round Guard, another Peggle roguelite game, although I have no idea how they compare. I'd recommend checking this one out though, if you want another one more run kind of game you can just pop in and out of for short bursts, and this was the first demo worthy of going on the wish list. The next demo I tried was for Where Is My Parking Spot, where the premise is that parking your car has been turned into a televised sports event. It's essentially a time trial game where letting off the gas is not an option, and you maneuver this perpetually moving forward car through parking lots filled with obstacles and jumps into the final parking spot. This was the first demo I played that I felt was very polished, with great presentation and visuals and a rockin' soundtrack for grinding out levels. And boy will you grind, since the car controls in an odd way that takes time getting used to, with a limited amount of brake taps being the only way to change directions. The obstacles in your way are things like rogue shopping carts and cars backing out of spots as you go behind them. They were going for realism, I guess. These moving objects make moving out of danger an additional thing to grapple while just struggling to turn through the lot itself. There's not really much else to describe here, it's just a simple game to grasp. I'd say this is probably a solid game, but it's just not my thing. I didn't particularly feel like grinding out attempts at levels trying to complete them, so I didn't play it for long. Not to say that I'm fully against time trial sorts of games, since I do enjoy, say, Trackmania, Quake Race Mode, and rocket jumping, but this particular one didn't gel with me, and due to that, the full game did not wind up on the Steam wishlist. The fourth demo I tried was for Hex of the Lich, a game that reminds me of Hoplite on Android oddly. And while one similarity is the pixel mobile game graphics, the real similarity between the two is that they both involve moving a unit, or units in this game's case, around a battlefield made of hexes, in turn-based battles. You have a party of 3 units, and unlike Hoplite, you can move more than one hex away each turn. You have some interesting decisions to make with your attacks, as they are often shaped in odd ways that cover only a certain pattern of hexes, such as perhaps a C shape in front of you. There's also some different attack effects to take into account, like pushing enemies tile back, and you can use this to push them into objects or each other. Anything within an attack's hex radius gets hit, which means you kinda have to try and not hit your teammates as well, something I struggled with. From what I could tell, battles against the enemies are all that you do in this. You don't move through a dungeon or anything else. This game didn't really grip me, although maybe I would like it as a mobile game, but give the demo a try if it looks more up your alley. Once again, I didn't have much to say about this one, which means it did not get on the Steam wishlist. The next demo I tried was for Fallen Aces, a game you perhaps have actually heard of, since it's published and promoted by New Blood Interactive, who published boomer shooter hits like Dusk and Ultra Kill. The first thing you'll notice about this game is the presentation. It is a noir detective comic book come to life in both looks and sound. While I can't say this is a completely new visual style to me, as Void Bastards also did the first-person comic book look well, it's still great. While the visuals got me to download the demo, the gameplay is just as much of a treat. Despite the New Blood Interactive connection, this game is not actually a boomer shooter, but more of an immersive sim like Prey or Dishonored, or the aforementioned Void Bastards. You play as a detective being guided by a Batman-type character through a city full of classic gangsters. And unlike the immersive sims I've played, the focus seems to be mostly on the combat, as you'll spend a lot of time staking out how to take on the next room full of gangsters and not looting every nook and cranny, or crafting new gear instead. The demo only contained the first level, and in this level you rely only on melee weapons. I'm not sure if the whole game will be melee focused, as you do get a gun later on in the level, so it could just be a progression thing. It does seem the combat is tailored for melee, as you have blocking, dodging, and weapon throwing abilities, and the majority of enemies in this demo use melee only as well. You don't only have to run up and punch the bad guys, but you can also stealth up and hide in the shadows, and the game shows how hidden you are in the Doom Guy style character portrait in the HUD. You can also throw objects around the world to assist with combat directly or to distract enemies and get some sneaky backstabs in. For me personally, this gave me the same feeling as Prey, where you crouch around with melee out, attempting to backstab any unsuspecting enemies. Sort of like Prey, there's also dialogue with other characters that plays through your radio as you traverse through the world, which adds some extra glue to the game. You really want to know what the Batman-like dude is up to. On another note, the game performed well with high frame rates and had no bugs that I noticed, which is extra important for a first-person 3D game. This demo was a bit short and there's probably a lot of pieces of the game that aren't in the demo, but I heartily recommend trying it out for yourself, and Fallen Aces did wind up on the Steam wishlist. While the previous demo I played was a much more visually impressive, big-name title perhaps, Deep Rune is a much more unassuming title that I tried. While it doesn't have the best graphics in its preview screenshots, You can tell from the way it looks and is laid out that it is kind of a peak gamer sort of game. Basically what I'm trying to say is I really liked this game's demo. It seems to speak to what I like in games. Ways I could try to describe this game would be Metroidvania, maybe Zelda 2-like, a bit of dungeon crawler sort of game. You spawn in the middle of this 2D map and have to figure out where to go next, fighting monsters, leveling up, and becoming stronger. You move around in real time like Metroid per se, with a weird default control scheme. The dev wants you to move with mouse for some reason, but you can use the keyboard. However, battles are turn-based, like a roguelike dungeon crawler, and you'll find several areas of powerful enemies that are blocking your way. You'll have to explore and find weaker enemies to fight for XP, as well as equips and items that will help you get past these obstacles of tough enemies. There are also keys scattered throughout the world, and you will have to choose which doors to use them on wisely, as it seems there are more doors than keys. Now when you die in this game, you respawn at the starting place, and the game ticks down a number of retries left, which is a bit of a different idea for this kind of game. I assume once you die the 10 times it allows, it's all over. Imagine dying 10 times in Metroid and your progress is just completely wiped. However, I did manage to get to the end of the demo without this mechanic kicking in, but it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the full game, if you go further on to other map areas like in Metroid. There were also map areas I didn't get to in the demo, so it seems there may be branching paths or at least other areas to find if you're more thorough. There are also multiple characters you could select with different traits when you started a new game, reminiscent of roguelite games, but since this game isn't like that in structure, I'm not sure when you would play a different character. Overall, I'd call this game my sleeper hit of the next fest. Although this demo may slightly mislead me, and the game might not quite have a connected campaign in the final release. Whether that happens or not, I eagerly await to see what the final product is like, and I can say this game has been wishlisted. Oh yeah, this game is in 4x3 for some reason. The next demo I played was an actual boomer shooter that I have seen the trailer floating around for, so you may have heard of it. That boomer shooter is Project Warlock II. First off, I must say this game had a weird technical issue where it seems by accident they didn't include the option to use a standard 1920 by 1080 resolution, so getting the game full screen in that res was weird. Tech issues aside, this shooter was a solid romp with some more unique ideas. The core thing I remember from this game is the combat. There will be lots of groups of enemies for you to deal with, and some enemies require you to try and maximize your damage output in order to be more successful in clearing the whole group. One way to help with damage is headshots. Yes, they are a thing in this game, something I did not expect out of a game with this style of presentation. The weapons also have a cool interaction where, while you will need to reload them eventually, if you switch to a different gun, we'll say gun 2 before the reload animation starts, use gun 2, and then switch back to gun 1, that gun will be reloaded, meaning effectively the game wants you to switch gun to gun to gun to sword, gun, to effectively take care of groups. Yes, there is a sword too, and you will use it a lot, as switching to it after using a gun is a quick burst of high damage. While this may sound a bit Doom Eternal-like in the amount of weapon switching you will need to do, it didn't quite feel the same as there's no secondary items like grenades you need to factor in for as well, and I appreciated this simpler switching cadence. While I would say the game leans a tad bit more combat focused, there are some nice classic Doom style levels for you to take your time to explore as well, with helpful terminals to read to get tips and secret areas to find. The secrets I did find were intuitive to find, which is something the game itself lampshades, with the terminal stating you don't need to spam the use keys on walls. After a certain point in the level, I also got the choice of upgrading my guns in several directions. I turned my machine gun into a laser gun, so if you're like me and enjoy those types of things, that's yet another way this game can hook you. I must also say that the game visually looks pretty cool. It's one of those retro modern mixes that actually looks pretty good, and it ran at high frame rates to boot. The demo was only one level, so I'm not sure if I have a true feel on what this game will be like, since you only get 3 of the 8 or so weapons in the game, but I can say I did like what I saw enough to put it on the wish list. Tailquest Defense was the next demo I tried, and I think it actually might be one of my favorite looking of the bunch. As a fun technical side note, this game was made in Godot engine, the same engine that the surprise hit Cruelty Squad was made in. I think it's the best looking Godot engine game I've seen so far. Not to put down Cruelty Squad. From the screenshots, it's kinda hard to tell what the game is, but I can describe it well. It's a simplistic tower defense style game, but you navigate the levels like Captain Toad, which is a 3D puzzle platformer, and you can also jump in this one. You play as this weird fox raccoon thing that needs to defend little cat munchkin things from color-coded robot things. To do so, you place towers in a pre-made level using currency accumulated from killing enemies, and yeah, that sounds familiar, right? What's different here is that you can actually walk around the level, and therefore you can interact with it. There will be weird puzzle things in the world that reveal hidden secrets that help you, such as stashed money or just a mounted turret to use. As for the tower defense element, it's not just straightforward gun kills enemy. As I mentioned earlier, the robots are color-coded, and you use the same color turret to damage them. You can also place multicolor turrets, which sacrifice damage for the ability to hit more colors, but the game mostly wants you to place single color towers, which deal the most damage, but can only shoot one kind of enemy. The demo was only 2 levels, so I can't really say if it gets challenging or not, but if a ton of different colored enemies are introduced, I could see this game getting hard, as you will need to juggle limited tower spots with needed colors for attacking. For the first 2 easier levels, I was still oddly engaged with this game. I think the presentation of this game just holds it up. You want to stare at those weird cats and the weird plants that are your towers, and the weird raccoon player character, and just the weird everything. On a side note, this demo also had co-op, although I'm not really sure how interesting that would be in this. Oh, and this was also the only demo I played that actually had a Linux version, you know, for my Linux gaming PC. So props to the devs for that. That meant the game was guaranteed to work on my machine. Surprisingly, this game wound up on my wishlist. I think part of that is the game's Steam page showing how it will spice up later on. But it's just the quirkiness of the thing that made it appealing to me as well. But let me tell you, the next demo I tried, it had heart. It definitely had heart. Roxy Racoon was the name of this heart-filled game, and it tries to be a Mario Odyssey style game, but it's got low poly animals and witchcraft instead. Unfortunately, the game just doesn't feel that good to control in the demo, and it seems kinda unpolished in some aspects. I know it's an indie game festival, but nothing else I tried felt off like this demo did. At its core, it's definitely a 3D collectathon platformer, with a hub world you start in to pick your world, and levels with multiple stars for you to discover and collect in your own order. This game is a bit more Odyssey-like in that there are lots of stars that have preset challenges to complete to obtain them, and there are also 100 coins, or gems, in this one, to collect in each level for a star. The raccoon you play as can run around, hop, climb up most surfaces, and do a glowing witch dash move. However, this doesn't feel good to control. Partially I think this is since the movement was designed for keyboard, so you have no analog movement, which can't be helped, but it feels worse in this style of platformer. The low poly look of everything doesn't really seem to be for style purposes, but more due to budget or artistic constraints, and isn't that appealing looking in my opinion. Another Mario Odyssey idea in this game is the hats. You can find and buy hats for your raccoon to wear, although they aren't much of a visual bonus in this game in my opinion. I also ran into some bugginess with collisions that made the game harder. There was a star where you needed to hit a soccer ball into a goal, and on the way of moving the ball to the goal, the ball got stuck under a park bench instead. I just had to redo the level to get it unstuck. Speaking of levels, the 2 levels that I tried were not really that interesting to run around. Another minus point for this game. Overall, I can feel this game's dev really does like collectathon platformers, and this game does try to include every good element from them, but it just misses the mark. It should be obvious at this point that this game did not wind up on the wishlist. The demo for Dread Delusion was the final one I played, and although I haven't heard of this one, I had heard of its developers and publisher, as they are behind the Dread X Collection series, which are cool compilations of Windows 95 and PS1 style horror games. This game definitely matches the visual flair of these other games, with the creepy lo-fi look to it, although I think this game goes a bit overboard with effects. It has this weird shimmer effect when you move, perhaps trying to emulate bad deinterlacing, which I find awful to look at, although I'm not a fan of fake VHS or fake CRT filters either. Now I hate to say it, but this game does kinda remind me of Skyrim. It is sort of an action RPG game, where you explore around a world and do quests. While you do play as a preset character narrative-wise, you can't change their name or look, you do sort of create your character in stats when you start the game by customizing their backstory elements, which affects their stats. Now I won't explain too much of the story, but at least in the demo, your adventure takes place in a land of floating islands. The visuals and music in this game do immerse you in the odd world you find yourself in, but overall this demo did not impress me. The start of this game is a bit slow, as the game gives you your bearings both narratively and slowly sets you towards the game's first major city. Getting to the city highlights a big issue I have in this demo, where much of the open world you run through is super empty with no interesting side caves or anything like that to interact with. Additionally, a large portion of the world is just blocked off in the demo. You can see it, but there's an invisible trigger that pops up with a box saying that it's not in the demo, which is kind of an annoying way to do this. Maybe don't tease me and show the areas then? Unfortunately, by the time I got to the main town, I was a bit turned off on the game, as I had been mostly walking forward, talking to NPCs purely with tutorial or exposition text, and not any cool quests or anything. And I didn't get a chance to engage much in the combat, alchemy, trade, or any of the other systems the game has to offer, which I did see were in the game when I finally got to the town. I think this may be a blueprint on how not to make a demo for a game, since I'm sure under the surface there's a cool RPG game, but I just couldn't get to it. Well, I really wanted to wishlist this game. Unfortunately, I couldn't for now, but perhaps seeing the final product may change my mind. So, in a quick summary, I liked 5 of the 10 demos I tried, and thought 2 others were neat, so I don't think trying random Next Fest demos was a waste of time. In fact, quite the opposite of. I've got some cool game releases to look forward to now. As a reminder, if you want to try any of the games featured in this video, links to their Steam store pages will be in the description. And at least currently you can still use the Steam Next Fest webpage. Also, in case you haven't figured it out by now, all the game footage was taken from my live streams, hence my ugly mug being in the footage. Sometimes I like to dig into random indies on Steam and itch.io, as well as other games. I hope I've inspired everyone else to go digging for indie gems, and if you find anything cool, be sure to leave a comment on what you found. This certainly won't be my last time trying out random indie games.